The last maid left Blackwood Manor before sunrise, clutching her little silver cross and whispering that the master had no soul. By noon, the whole village of Ashford Falls had heard the story. By supper, it had grown teeth. Some said she had seen Count Adrian Blackwood walking the east corridor with no reflection in the windows. Others swore she had heard crying from the locked tower, though no woman had lived in that part of the house for 7 years. The baker claimed the count never stepped into daylight. The church sexton said no servant ever lasted a week beneath that roof because Blackwood Manor itself rejected the living. Emily Carter heard every word while standing outside the hiring office with rain dripping from the brim of her worn bonnet and mud drying around the hem of her gray dress. She had $13 folded inside her glove, a single carpetbag at her feet, and nowhere left to go. Her father's medicine had emptied every drawer, every jar, every hope she had saved. His funeral had been small. The debt he left behind was not. So when the old notice board offered room, board, and steady wages for a housemaid at Blackwood Manor, Emily did not look away. Fear was a luxury for girls with warm parlors to return to. She walked the 3 miles up the hill road as the afternoon darkened, passing bare maples, broken stone walls, and fields silvered by cold rain. At the top, Blackwood Manor rose against the sky like a judgment no one had dared question. Its windows were tall and black. Its chimneys stood like watchmen. Ivy clung to the stone as if trying to hold the house together by force. When Emily pulled the iron bell, the sound moved through the manor slowly, deep and hollow, as though waking something that preferred to sleep. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Hargrove, the housekeeper, a narrow woman in a black dress with keys at her waist and suspicion in every line of her face. Her eyes traveled from Emily's muddy shoes to her pale, steady expression. "You are smaller than the last one," she said. "I am stronger than I look," Emily answered softly. Mrs. Hargrove did not smile. She led her inside through a hall lit by candles even though it was not yet evening. The air smelled of old wood, cold stone, and fires that had been allowed to die too often. Servants moved like shadows along the walls, lowering their eyes as Emily passed. "There are 3 rules in this house," Mrs. Hargrove said. "You will not look directly at his lordship's face. You will not enter the north tower. You will not speak of the fire." Emily held her carpetbag with both hands. "Yes, ma'am. And if you are wise," the housekeeper added, stopping at the foot of the grand staircase, "you will not mistake silence for safety." Before Emily could answer, every candle along the corridor seemed to tremble. A sound came from above. One slow step, then another. The servants froze. Mrs. Hargrove lowered her head. Emily looked up. Count Adrian Blackwood stood on the staircase, tall and motionless in a dark coat, one hand resting on the carved railing. The right side of his face was handsome in a severe, sorrowful way. The left was marked by the old ruin of flame, half hidden in shadow, yet impossible not to see. His gray eyes settled on Emily with the tired sharpness of a man already expecting horror. No one breathed. The manor waited for the usual gasp, the dropped bag, the backward step. Emily felt the weight of every warning in the hall. She felt the cold. She felt the sadness, too, deep and silent as a locked room. Then she bent into a respectful curtsy, lifted her eyes just enough to meet his, and smiled. For one breath, the whole entrance hall remained still, as if the manor itself had forgotten how to make a sound. Count Adrian Blackwood looked down at Emily Carter, and the faintest change passed through his expression, not softness, not welcome, but something closer to disbelief. No servant had smiled at him in years. Some forced politeness, some lowered their eyes with trembling respect, and some stared at the floor so hard they might have been praying for the boards to open beneath them. But this girl, with rain on her bonnet and mud on her plain shoes, had looked at him as though he were neither legend nor warning, but merely a man standing in his own house. Mrs. Hargrove recovered first. "Miss Carter," she said sharply, "you will remember yourself." Emily lowered her gaze at once, though the smile had already done its damage. "Yes, ma'am." Adrian's hand tightened on the banister. Candlelight touched the marked side of his face, then slipped away from it. "How long is this one expected to last?" he asked. His voice was low, refined, and colder than the rain against the windows. Mrs. Hargrove folded her hands. "That depends upon whether she learns quickly, my lord." Emily felt the servants watching from doorways and corners, waiting for her to shrink. Instead, she stood with her carpetbag in both hands and kept her breathing steady. Adrian studied her another moment, then turned away. See that she does. He disappeared along the upper corridor, his footsteps fading into the east wing, where the shadows seemed to gather thicker than anywhere else in the house. Only when he was gone did the servants move again. A kitchen maid crossed herself. A footman exhaled as if he had been underwater. Mrs. Hargrove seized Emily's carpetbag and thrust it into the arms of a younger maid. Mary will show you the servants' stairs and your room. You begin at 5 tomorrow morning. The silver needs polishing, the breakfast room needs laying, and the east corridor is not to be entered unless I send you. Mary was no older than 20, with anxious brown eyes and a cap pinned too tightly over her curls. She led Emily down a narrow passage behind the main hall, speaking in a whisper even when no one followed. You should not have done that. Smiled. Emily asked. Mary glanced over her shoulder. Looked. Smiled. Breathed too boldly. It is all the same here. They climbed 2 flights of back stairs to a small attic room with a sloped ceiling, 1 iron bed, and a window facing the north tower. The tower rose black against the fading sky, its upper windows boarded, its stone darker than the rest of the manor, as if smoke had soaked into it and refused to leave. Mary saw Emily looking. Do not ask about that place. I was not going to. Good. The last girl did. Emily turned from the window. And that is why she left? Mary's face tightened. That is what Mrs. Hargrove says. Before Emily could ask more, a sound drifted through the wall, faint but unmistakable. Piano music. Not bright parlor music meant for guests, but a slow, broken melody that seemed to feel its way through darkness. Each note trembled, paused, and continued as if the player had forgotten how beauty was supposed to sound. Mary went pale. Do not listen. Who is playing? No one, Mary whispered, already backing toward the door. No one you should ever follow. That night, after supper in the servants' hall, Emily lay awake beneath a thin wool blanket while the wind moved across the roof like a hand searching for a way inside. The manor settled around her with long sighs of timber and stone. Somewhere below, a door closed. Somewhere farther away, the piano began again. Emily listened despite herself. There was grief in the tune, but not madness. There was loneliness, but not cruelty. At last she rose, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and opened her door. The servants' corridor was nearly dark. She followed the music down one stair, then another, past covered portraits and cold fireplaces, until she reached a locked door at the end of the east hall. Light showed beneath it. The music stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then his voice came from the other side, quiet and dangerously calm. Curiosity kills servants, Miss Carter. Emily's hand rested against the cold wood. She could have apologized. She could have run. Instead, she answered softly, Loneliness does too, my lord. Emily did not know how long the silence lasted after her words passed through the locked door. The east corridor held its breath around her. Rain touched the tall windows in thin silver lines, and somewhere within the walls, Oldwood gave a quiet groan. Then the key turned. The door opened only a few inches at first, enough for candlelight to spill across the floor and touch the hem of her plain gray dress. Count Adrian Blackwood stood inside the room, one hand on the edge of the door, his expression unreadable. He had removed his evening coat. His shirt sleeves were rolled neatly to his forearms, and the marked side of his face was no longer hidden by the careful angle of shadow he used before others. Emily understood then that he had opened the door not out of welcome, but challenge. He wanted her to see. He wanted the moment to break her. Behind him, the room was not a ballroom or a grand music chamber as she had imagined, but a private sitting room abandoned to memory. A piano stood near the window, its dark wood polished by use. A white cloth covered something tall in the corner, perhaps a mirror, perhaps a portrait. On the table beside the piano rested a single candle, a folded handkerchief, and a pocket watch stopped beneath its glass. Adrian's gray eyes fixed upon her. You have been in this house less than a day, Miss Carter, and already you disobey instructions. Emily folded her hands before her. I followed the music, my lord. That was not an invitation. No, my lord. Then why are you here? She could have said she had lost her way. She could have bowed her head and begged to keep her position. Instead, she looked toward the piano, where the final note still seemed to tremble in the air. Because it sounded unfinished. Something flickered across his face, a brief disturbance beneath the ice. Everything in this house is unfinished. He opened the door wider, not with courtesy, but with a severity that dared her to step closer. Look at me properly, then. Satisfy whatever village curiosity brought you to my door. Emily felt the cold floor through the soles of her shoes. She lifted her eyes. The scar crossed the left side of his face in pale, uneven lines, changing the shape of what had once been unmistakable handsomeness. It was not pleasant. It was not easy to see, but it was not monstrous. What unsettled her was not the ruined skin. It was the sorrow held so tightly behind his eyes that it had hardened into anger. Adrian watched her without blinking. Does it disgust you? The question came softly, which made it far more painful than if he had shouted. Emily thought of her father in his last winter, when sickness had taken the strength from his body, but not the gentleness from his hands. She thought of neighbors who had brought advice, but no bread, pity, but no help. She thought of all the beautiful faces she had seen turn away when kindness became inconvenient. No, my lord, she said. Cruelty disgusts me. Pain does not. The candle flame bent in a draft that neither of them felt. Adrian's expression changed so little that another person might have missed it, but Emily saw his hand loosen on the door. For a moment, he looked less like a master prepared to dismiss a servant and more like a man who had heard his own name spoken after years of being called something else. You speak boldly for a housemaid. I speak honestly for one. Honesty has cost better people more than you can afford. Then I suppose I had better spend it carefully. The edge of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, not even close, but something living passed through his face and vanished. He turned away first, returning to the piano. You will bring my supper to the library tomorrow evening. No one else. Emily lowered her head. Yes, my lord. She had nearly reached the corridor when his voice stopped her. Miss Carter. She turned back. He stood beside the piano, half in candlelight, half in shadow, as if the room itself could not decide whether to keep or release him. Do not mistake this for trust. Emily gave him the smallest curtsy. No, my lord. I will mistake it for supper. For the first time since she had entered Blackwood Manor, the silence that followed did not feel entirely dead. By the next morning, the servants' hall had already made a legend of Emily Carter's conversation with the Count. Mary would not meet her eyes over breakfast. Thomas, the footman, stared at her as if she had walked through fire and returned with flowers in her hands. Even the cook, a broad woman named Mrs. Bell who had seen 3 decades of household storms, paused while slicing bread and murmured, "Girls who speak too plainly in this house learn the cost of it." Emily accepted her cup of coffee and warmed her fingers around it. Then I will learn carefully. No one laughed. At 6 o'clock, she began her duties. Blackwood Manor by daylight was not less sorrowful, only more exposed. Dust rested on the picture frames like gray lace. Heavy curtains smothered the windows. The breakfast room smelled faintly of ashes, though no fire had been lit there in weeks. In the east corridor, where she had been told not to linger, the carpets bore the faded path of one man's restless walking. Emily polished silver until she could see the pale oval of her face in each spoon, then carried fresh linen to the dining room, then helped Mary beat the dust from rugs in the back courtyard while the cold wind reddened their hands. Yet her thoughts returned again and again to the room with the piano, to the stopped watch, to the way Adrian Blackwood had asked whether his face disgusted her, as if the answer had already condemned him long before she arrived. Near noon, while Mrs. Hargrove was occupied with household accounts, Emily found a small vase in a storage cabinet, rinsed it clean, and placed inside it 3 white camellias from the neglected conservatory. She set the vase on the library tray beside his tea. Mary saw it and nearly dropped a stack of plates. Take those away. Why? Emily asked. His lordship does not like flowers. Has he said so? He does not have to. No one puts flowers near him. Emily looked at the white petals, delicate against the dark tray. Perhaps that is not the same thing. The library was colder than the rest of the manor, lined floor to ceiling with books whose leather spines had dulled with age. Count Adrian sat at the far end of the room, writing at a large mahogany desk. He did not look up when she entered, though she knew he heard every step. She placed the tray at his elbow with careful quiet. His pen stopped. What is that? Tea, my lord. Beside the tea. Camellias. I know what they are, Miss Carter. I asked why they are there. Emily folded her hands. The room looked as if it had forgotten spring. He turned then, slowly, his gray eyes moving from the flowers to her face. It is October. Then it has forgotten more than spring. The silence sharpened. Somewhere behind her, the fire gave a soft collapse of coal. Adrian reached toward the vase. For one strange second, Emily thought he meant to throw it into the hearth. Instead, his fingers stopped just before touching the petals. His hand remained there, suspended between rejection and memory. You are very determined to be dismissed. No, my lord. I am determined to be useful. Useful servants follow instructions. So do frightened ones. His eyes lifted to hers. The words had been quiet, but they had struck their mark. Before he could answer, the library door opened without a knock. A man entered as if the house had been expecting him and belonged partly to him already. He was fair-haired, handsome in a polished, careless way, with a traveling coat dusted from the road and a smile too smooth to be warm. Adrian, he said, still hiding among dead books and colder company. I see. Adrian's face closed at once. Lucian. Emily lowered her eyes, but not before she saw the change in the room. This was no ordinary guest. The air itself seemed to tighten around him. Lucian Blackwood's gaze slid to Emily, measuring her cap, her apron, the plainness of her dress, and finally the white camellias on the tray. His smile deepened. A new maid. How brave. Or how uninformed. Adrian's voice was low. State your business. Family concern, naturally. Word travels, even from houses that pretend to have no windows. Lucian stepped closer to the desk and picked up one of the camellias between two fingers. You should be careful, girl. Do not mistake a beast's silence for gentleness. Emily felt Adrian go still beside her. She looked at the crushed flower in Lucian's hand, then at his perfect smile. No, sir, she said softly. I would never mistake silence for gentleness, nor a smile for kindness. For the second time since her arrival, Blackwood Manor fell into a silence that did not know what to do with her. Lucian Blackwood remained at the manor for dinner, though no one had invited him to stay and no one seemed surprised that he did. His presence changed the house in a way Emily could feel before she could name it. The servants walked faster. Mrs. Hargrove's voice grew sharper. Even the candles in the dining room seemed to burn lower, as if unwilling to shine too brightly upon whatever old arrangement had brought him there. Count Adrian sat at the head of the long table, silent and severe, while Lucian spoke enough for both of them. He praised the estate accounts with the tone of a man inspecting an inheritance. He asked after repairs with the ease of someone who expected to authorize them one day. He mentioned neighbors, lawyers, and distant cousins, all while smiling as though every word were harmless. Emily served quietly with Mary at her side, but she noticed how Adrian's hand stilled whenever Lucian mentioned the North Tower. She noticed how Mrs. Hargrove watched Emily more closely than she watched the silver. After supper, a storm settled over Blackwood Manor. Rain swept against the windows, and wind pressed at the walls until the old house answered with creaks from every beam. Emily was sent to the linen room for fresh cloths after Thomas slipped on the wet-back steps and bruised his wrist. The nearest store cupboard was empty, so Mary, pale with worry, whispered that there were older bandages kept in a chest near the servants' passage by the north wing. Not the tower, Mary said quickly. Only near it. Do not go farther than the blue door. Emily took a candle and went. The corridors beyond the kitchen were narrower, less polished, and colder by several degrees. Her flame bent sideways as she passed shuttered windows and portraits turned toward the wall. At the blue door, she found the chest, but the bandage rolls inside had yellowed with age. A second draft touched her candle. It came from a stairwell she had not noticed, half hidden behind a hanging tapestry. At the top, faintly, something tapped again and again. Not footsteps, not music. A loose shutter, perhaps, striking wood in the storm. Emily should have turned back. She thought of the third rule. She thought of Adrian's face when Lucian had spoken of silence and beasts. Then she thought of a house built around fear, and how fear often guarded the very thing that needed light most. She climbed. The stairwell curled upward through darkness and dust, each step colder than the last. At the top stood a door with blackened edges, unlocked. The room beyond had once been beautiful. Emily could tell from the curve of the window frame, the remains of pale wallpaper, and the delicate legs of a small writing table. Now everything bore the stain of a fire long past. Not a scene of horror, but of abandonment. Ash had been scrubbed away, yet its memory remained in the wood, in the stone, in the air itself. The loose shutter struck again, making the candle tremble. Emily moved to secure it, and her skirt brushed something beneath the table. She knelt and found a narrow strip of blue ribbon, brittle at one end, preserved under dust as if the room had been waiting for someone patient enough to look down. Beside it lay a pocket watch, tarnished but intact. Its hands had stopped at 2:17. Emily turned it over. There, engraved in small, elegant letters, was a name that made the room seem colder than before. Lucian Blackwood. The door opened behind her. Emily rose so quickly the candle flame shook. Count Adrian stood in the doorway, his face pale with fury or fear, she could not tell which. His eyes went first to the watch in her hand, then to the ribbon, then to her. Put it down. His voice was quiet, and the quiet frightened her more than anger would have. My lord, I was only looking for linen. In the North Tower? Someone was hurt. And so you climbed into a grave. The word struck the air between them. Emily lowered the watch, but did not release it. This has Mr. Lucian's name on it. Adrian crossed the room in 2 long steps and took it from her hand, not roughly, but with the urgency of a man snatching memory back from a ledge. You do not understand what you are touching. Then tell me. Rain battered the broken shutter behind her. Candlelight moved across his scar, across the old pain he wore like a sentence. Leave this house before it buries you too. Emily looked at the burned room, the stopped watch, the blue ribbon, and finally at the man who had survived something no one here dared name. Then tell me who buried you first. Adrian did not answer at once. The storm filled the ruined tower with sound, rain against shutters, wind through seams in the stone, the old house murmuring as though it feared what might be spoken there. He stood between Emily and the door, the pocket watch closed inside his hand, his knuckles pale around its tarnished silver. For the first time since she had entered Blackwood Manor, he did not look like a man guarding his temper. He looked like a man guarding a wound. Her name was Rose Whitfield, he said at last. The name entered the room softly, yet everything seemed to bend around it. Emily remained still. She was to be my wife. Adrian looked past her toward the dark window, where rain ran down the glass in trembling lines. 7 years ago, this tower was not closed. It was the brightest room in the house. Rose used it for letters, music, and all the little unnecessary things that make a place feel alive. She tied blue ribbons around the curtains because she said Blackwood Manor had too much shadow and not enough sky. Emily glanced at the ribbon on the table, fragile and faded, and felt the sorrow of it settle in her chest. Adrian continued, each word measured as if he had carved it from stone. There was a dinner that night. Lucian came, as he often did then. He was charming. He was useful. He knew every account, every family weakness, every door that did not lock properly. My father had trusted him. I was foolish enough to do the same. His mouth tightened, but his voice did not rise. Near midnight, a servant came to say Rose wished to see me in the tower. I remember thinking it strange. She disliked cold rooms. I came anyway. The candle in Emily's hand had burned low, wax gathering near her fingers, but she did not move. When I reached the door, I heard her inside. She sounded frightened. I tried to enter, but the door had been locked from the outside. He looked down at the watch in his palm. This was found later in the corridor. Lucian said he had lost it earlier that evening. Everyone believed him. They always did. Emily's voice was gentle. And you? Adrian's eyes returned to hers, carrying 7 years of darkness. By the time the door was opened, the room was filled with smoke. I found her near the window. He stopped. The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with everything he refused to describe. I carried guilt out of this room, he said, and the fire carried the rest of me. Emily understood why no mirror remained uncovered, why music stopped when footsteps approached, why every servant had been trained to fear the tower more than truth. Did they say you caused it? They did not need to say it loudly. Whispers are more efficient. A grieving man, a disfigured man, a bride gone before the wedding. It was enough. His gaze hardened with old shame. Lucian wept at the memorial. Mrs. Hargrove swore he had been in the west parlor all night. Within a month, the village had its monster. Emily stepped closer, slowly enough that he could refuse the movement if he wished. He did not, and you let them believe it. I survived when she did not. That is not a confession. It was enough for me. Her eyes softened, but not with pity. Pity would have been easier for him to reject. This was harder, because it asked him to stand upright under mercy. A monster does not mourn someone for 7 years, she said. A monster does not keep a room locked because memory hurts too much to dust. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the anger had thinned, leaving exhaustion beneath it. You should not speak as if you know me. No, my lord. I speak as if I can see you. The words moved through him with more force than accusation ever had. For a moment, the candlelight made his scar neither terrible nor hidden, only human. Then footsteps sounded below the tower stairs. A slow, deliberate approach. Adrian's expression changed instantly. He took the ribbon from the table and pressed it into Emily's hand, closing her fingers around it with grave care. Hide that. Why? Because if Lucian learns what you found, he will not let you remain here long enough to smile at me again. The footsteps stopped outside the tower door, and for one suspended moment, Emily felt Adrian's hand still over hers, holding the fragile blue ribbon between their palms like a secret neither of them had chosen, but both now carried. Then he released her and turned toward the door, just as Lucian Blackwood appeared in the threshold with Mrs. Hargrove behind him, her ring of keys glinting at her waist. Lucian's smile arrived before his words did. How curious, he said. I was told the North Tower was closed. Adrian stood very still. It is. Lucian's pale eyes moved to Emily. Yet your newest maid finds her way into it by candlelight. How quickly she has become privileged. Mrs. Hargrove's mouth tightened. Miss Carter was instructed plainly, my lord. Emily lowered her eyes, slipping the ribbon into the fold of her apron with fingers that did not tremble until the cloth hid them. Thomas injured his wrist. I came looking for clean linen. In a room sealed for 7 years? Lucian asked. A careless mistake, sir. Careless mistakes are dangerous in old houses. His gaze lingered on her apron, and Emily knew he had noticed more than she wished. Adrian stepped slightly between them. The movement was small, but in a house trained to read fear, it felt enormous. Miss Carter will return downstairs. Lucian's smile thinned. Of course, we would not want a servant filling her head with stories above her station. Emily moved toward the door, but Lucian shifted just enough to slow her passage. His voice dropped as she passed. Some doors are locked for mercy, Miss Carter. Others because those who open them are rarely believed. Emily looked up at him then, seeing no monster in the house except the one who wore charm like polished silver. I have found that truth does not become smaller simply because a servant sees it first. She left before Mrs. Hargrove could speak. By morning, the punishment had begun, though no one called it that. Emily was sent from one unpleasant task to another. She scrubbed the back stairs until her knees ached, carried coal buckets through the damp courtyard, and polished a pantry of brass handles no guest would ever touch. Mary tried to help, but Mrs. Hargrove watched too closely. At noon, whispers reached the servants' hall that Emily had been found creeping in forbidden rooms. By evening, the whispers had grown. She was ambitious. She was improper. She had bewitched his lordship with pity and bold eyes. Emily said nothing. Silence, she had learned, could be armor if one wore it without bowing. On the third day, Mrs. Hargrove entered the kitchen holding a silver brooch shaped like a dove. This was found missing from the west parlor, she announced. Every servant turned. Emily, who had been folding napkins near the window, felt the room close around her. Search the girl's room, Mrs. Hargrove said. Mary's face went white. She would never. Affection is not evidence, the housekeeper replied. They climbed to the attic together, half the staff following as though invited to witness a sentence. Emily stood beside her narrow bed while Mrs. Hargrove opened her drawer, lifted her folded shawl, and drew out the silver brooch. A small sound left Mary's mouth. Emily looked at the brooch, then at Mrs. Hargrove's calm face, and understood with perfect clarity. This was not suspicion. It was removal. I did not take it, Emily said. Of course not, Mrs. Hargrove replied. No thief ever does. She took Emily by the elbow and led her to the great hall, where Lucian waited near the fireplace, already dressed for sympathy. Adrian stood at the foot of the staircase, one hand on the banister, his marked face unreadable. Mrs. Hargrove held out the brooch. Found among her things, my lord. I recommend dismissal before the week is out. The old fear moved through the servants like a draft. They expected Adrian to turn away, to retreat, to let the house swallow another girl whole. Instead, his gaze moved from the brooch to Emily's face. She did not plead. She did not weep. She only stood there, small in her plain dress, with her dignity held tighter than any stolen silver. Adrian's voice cut through the hall, quiet and absolute. "Search every room." Mrs. Hargrove blinked. "My lord." "Every room," he repeated. "Begin with Mrs. Hargrove's." Lucian's smile vanished so quickly it was almost a confession. Mrs. Hargrove's room was searched before the household that had once obeyed her without question, and the house seemed to lean closer as each drawer opened. At first there was only the ordinary evidence of a woman who had ruled servants too long. Pressed caps, account books, spare keys, bottles of lavender water, ribbons tied with exacting care. Then Mary, trembling so hard that the candle in her hand scattered light across the wall, found the letters beneath a false bottom in the writing desk. They were folded in neat stacks and sealed with the same pale wax Lucian Blackwood used for every piece of correspondence. Adrian read the first one in silence, then the second, then the third. No one spoke. Mrs. Hargrove stood near the hearth, her face gray with anger but not surprise. Lucian had vanished from the hall before the final drawer was opened, claiming he would not participate in an insult to a loyal servant, but his absence had weight. It sat in every corner like proof. The letters spoke carefully, never plainly enough for a careless reader, but clearly enough for one who already knew where to look. Keep the east wing undisturbed. Replace any servant who shows interest in the tower. His lordship must remain isolated for his own peace. If the girl continues asking questions, remove her before Sunday. Emily listened as Adrian's voice lowered with each line, not from weakness, but from something colder than grief. Recognition. The kind that arrives late and rearranges years. By nightfall, Mrs. Hargrove had been confined to a guest room under Thomas's watch, and a messenger had been sent for Mr. Lowell, the family attorney. Lucian returned at 10 o'clock with 2 local gentlemen and a physician whose black bag looked more ceremonial than useful. He did not look at the letters. He looked at Adrian. "This has gone far enough," Lucian said, standing in the candle hall as rain shivered against the windows. "You are unwell, cousin. Everyone here knows it. For years, this house has lived under your moods, your seclusion, your unfortunate fixations. Now a maid of 4 days has convinced you that loyal servants and family are enemies." Emily stood near the side wall, the blue ribbon hidden beneath the cuff of her sleeve. She felt every eye turned toward her. A maid's word was a small thing in a room of titled men. Lucian knew that. He built his smile upon it. "Ask yourselves," he continued, "whether a respectable estate should be guided by a wounded recluse who takes counsel from a servant girl." Adrian was silent, too silent. For a moment, Emily feared the old shame had returned to its throne. Then he stepped forward into the full candlelight. He did not turn his face away. He did not angle himself into shadow. The marked side of his face, so long treated as a warning, was revealed beneath every flame in the hall. The physician lowered his eyes. One of the gentlemen swallowed. Lucian's smile faltered. "You wanted witnesses," Adrian said. "You shall have them." Emily moved before fear could root her in place. She crossed the hall and laid the blue ribbon, the copied letters, and the tarnished pocket watch upon the long table. "I found these in the North Tower," she said. Her voice was quiet, yet the hall carried it. The ribbon belonged to Miss Rose Whitfield. The watch bears Mr. Lucian Blackwood's name. Its hand stopped at 2:17. Mrs. Hargrove's letters show that Mr. Blackwood ordered servants removed whenever they came near the truth. Lucian laughed softly. "Charming. A housemaid solves tragedies now." "No," Adrian said. "A housemaid refused to fear the room you needed buried." The attorney, Mr. Lowell, lifted the watch with a grave expression. "Mr. Blackwood, you told me this watch was lost before dinner that night." Lucian's face hardened. "I was mistaken. For 7 years?" Emily asked. The words were gentle, and because they were gentle, they struck deeper. Lucian looked at her with open contempt. "You forget your place." Adrian's hand came down on the table, not violently, but with the finality of a door closing. "No. For the first time in this house, someone has remembered hers. She stands with the truth." Lucian glanced toward the gentleman, toward the physician, toward any face that might still belong to him. None did. The candle flames trembled, and Blackwood Manor seemed to exhale a breath it had held for 7 years. Adrian lifted the watch from the table and faced his cousin fully. "This face is not my shame. The shame belongs to the man who taught a whole house to fear looking at it." Lucian Blackwood did not leave the Candle Hall with triumph. He left with the attorney's questions following him, with the physician refusing to meet his eyes, and with the first true silence of the household no longer belonging to fear. By morning, a carriage carried him down the hill road beneath a colorless sky, and Mrs. Hargrove went with him under the watch of Mr. Lowell's clerk, her keys removed from her waist for the first time in 30 years. No one cheered. Blackwood Manor was not that sort of house yet. It had forgotten how to celebrate. But something changed all the same. Mary opened the kitchen shutters without asking permission. Thomas carried fresh wood into the breakfast room. Mrs. Bell set coffee and warm biscuits on the servants' table and said, in a voice that tried very hard not to tremble, "Best eat while they are hot." In the east corridor, the covered portraits were uncovered one by one, and dust rose in pale clouds through the morning light. Count Adrian Blackwood did not become a different man in a day. Grief did not loosen its hands simply because truth had entered the room. He still walked slowly past mirrors. He still paused before the North Tower, as one might pause before a grave. But he no longer avoided the windows. He no longer turned his face away when servants passed. And when Emily brought tea to the library, the white camellias remained on his desk in a clean glass vase, their petals bright against the dark wood. 3 days later, Emily packed her carpet bag in the small attic room. The ribbon had been given to Mr. Lowell as evidence, the watch locked safely away, and the house had begun to mend around her. That was why she had to leave. She understood kindness. She understood gratitude. She understood the dangerous sweetness of being needed by someone far above her station. But she was a maid, and he was Count Blackwood, and the world outside the manor had rules even older than its stone walls. At dusk, she carried her bag down the servants' stairs. No one saw her at first. She reached the front doors just as the last light faded over the wet fields below. Her hand had touched the latch when his voice came from the hall behind her. "Were you going to disappear without saying goodbye, Miss Carter?" Emily closed her eyes briefly, then turned. Adrian stood near the foot of the staircase where she had first seen him, though now the candles burned brighter and no one lowered their gaze in fear. "I thought it best, my lord." "For whom?" The question was gentle, and that made it harder. Emily held the handle of her carpetbag with both hands. "For the house. For you. People will talk. They have talked for 7 years. This would be different." "Yes," he said. "This time, they would be wrong." Her breath caught, not because he had spoken loudly, but because he had not. He crossed the hall with the quiet gravity of a man approaching an altar. "When you smiled at me that first night," he said, "did you know what it would do?" Emily looked at the face the village had feared, the face the house had hidden, the face that now stood openly in candlelight. "No, my lord. I only knew no one should be looked at as if they were already dead." Something broke in his expression then, not painfully, but like ice surrendering to spring. "Stay," he said, "not as my maid. Not because this house needs you, though it does. Stay because I have spent 7 years being called a monster, and you were the first person who made me wish to become a man again." Emily's fingers loosened around the bag. "The world will not be kind." Adrian gave a faint, sorrowful smile. "Then let it learn from you." She looked toward the open windows, the uncovered portraits, the hall where fear had once stood guard and now found itself dismissed. Slowly, Emily set down her carpetbag. Adrian did not reach for her, as a lord claiming what he desired. He simply bowed his head before her, humbled by the mercy she had offered without ever naming it love. Weeks later, the village noticed smoke rising warmly from every chimney of Blackwood Manor. Curtains opened. Lamps glowed. Servants stayed. And in the eastern garden, where white camellias were planted beside the stone path, people sometimes saw Count Adrian walking beside Emily Carter in the clear afternoon light, no longer hiding from the sun, no longer hiding from himself. She had entered the manor as a girl no one expected to last a week. She remained as the woman who taught a grieving heart to beat without shame. Sometimes the face the world fears is only the masked grief, whereas when no one has been brave enough to look with kindness.